Hey Sean,
Hey Dale, what are we going to do?
we are going to do a collection view with a collection of photos. First thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to add the photos to the project so we have them. So I'm going to right click and use the add files, and on my desktop I have a set of trip photos from our trip to California last year. So I'm going to select the folder and then notice in the settings what we're choosing here, which is copy items if needed, which will actually make a copy of the photos in the project folder. And these photos, by the way, will be actually included in the iOS app. This is probably not typically what you would do unless you were using them as UI elements and such. They'd probably be downloaded from the net or pulled from somewhere else. But for the purpose of this is to show how to do a collection view with photos, not deal with internet transfer of images at the moment. We also want to create groups rather than folder references. A group will create a folder in the project, but it won't do a path within the storage, so we can just access the photos by their names. So I'm going to say add. Here is the folder that is the group that got created, and our photos are named Photo0 JPEG through Photo39.jpg, which means we have 40 photos that we're going to work with. So now let's begin actually developing our application that uses a collection view. So I'm going to the main storyboard, and I'm going to add a collection view to the user interface. I am going to set up this app so that there's a collection view in approximately the bottom 2/3 of the UI, and above it will be a UI image view so that when we tap on an image in the collection view, we'll see a larger version of it above in the UI image view. So I'm going to take my collection view and control-click drag vertically from it, do a top space to layout guide, and set that value to 150. And then I'm going to take the other three sides and pin them against the super view so they go all the way to the edges of the display. So I'm reselecting the collection view and doing pin. I did pin to trailing, now I'm going to do pin to top.
Which we now have conflicting constraints because you've already set a top constraint, so you're going to need to delete one of those top.
Yeah, why would I do top again, right? So I'm going to do select again after deleting that last one to bottom, and then finally pin to, did I do leading or trailing already?
You did leading already.
So I'm going to do trailing. Now I have some deltas, I need to fix those up, so I'm going to select the item and over here in the inspector change that -92 to 0, and that one's 0 and that one's 0, so that's good. I'm actually going to do an update frames so we can see that we have a collection view. It's 150 points down from the status bar and pinned to the other three sides. Here is my reusable cell within the collection view. I'm going to give it a reuse identifier right away, and I'm going to call this photo cell. And I'm calling it photo cell because I'm going to put a photograph inside the cell. We need to decide how big we want our cells to be within the collection view. The images that I took are in an aspect ratio that's 1.33333 to 1. Like an image that's 800 by 600 would be that aspect ratio. So I'm thinking a good starting point would be 80 by 60. So I selected the collection view and have decided to set the cell width to 80 and the cell height to 60. The images are going to be a lot bigger than that, but when we put the image in, we're going to make it scale into the UI image view that's inside this cell. The next thing I need to do is actually put a UI image view in the cell. So here's my cell selected. I go to my object library and I type IM for image, and I drag an image view into there. And I want my image view to occupy the full height and width of the cell, so I'm going to pin it to all four sides of its super view. The super view for the UI image view is the cell itself. So with the image selected, I'm going to editor pin leading space to super view. Image selected again, pin trailing space to super view. Image selected again, editor pin top space to super view. Image selected again, pin bottom space to super view. And to make sure everything looks right, I'm going to do an update frames if it needs one. Doesn't appear it does. So everything looks the way it should. We now have a UI image view inside of our cell, but we need a way to get to it. There are really two ways to do this. One is we could create a custom class, but that's more work than I really need to do for this. The other is to select that view object and note that I can set a tag on it. And right now it's set to 0, but you need something other than 0. So we're going to click up and make it have a tag of 1. This will allow us to use the code of view with tag. That's a method on the cell itself to obtain this UI image view. I also mentioned I needed to have a UI image view at the top.
Right.
So I'm going to grab my image view and drag it to the top. And I'm going to do a layout so that at top space to the layout guide, it's right against the top but below the status bar, and some distance from the collection view. So I'm going to control click drag down and do some vertical spacing. I'm going to set the vertical spacing to 10. And even though my images are not likely to be this wide, I'm going to take the other two sides and make them have a leading and a trailing space that is 0 out to the guides. We're actually going to have the image be the correct proportions. What do they call that? The aspect ratio?
Yep.
So it's just going to fit in here, and largely it's the vertical that's going to constrain it, but it's not going to like stretch out when we do this. I'm going to do an update frames. Oops, didn't mean to do that last click there. I'm going to do an update frames to show how this actually looks. And I need to make these choices that I just mentioned about the aspect ratio and how it's displayed. So with this image selected, right now it's scale to fill. That isn't what I'd want. It would stretch it out. I'm going to do aspect fit so that it'll fit in here. We'll see the whole image and it'll maintain its aspect ratio. I want to do something slightly different in the cell. I want to maintain aspect ratio, but I want every cell to be filled with image stuff to its edges so they all look the same. That means some cropping is going to occur, but there'll be enough of image visible that I kind of know which one it is, and when I tap on it I'll see the whole image. So I'm going to do an aspect fill on that image. So I believe we have our interface builder stuff done. I'm going to go into the assistant editor and do an IB outlet from the UI image view. And I'm just going to call this current image. What would I like to call it? Selected image. So we're going to say selected image view. It is an outlet on a UI image view. Good. And for the moment, I won't need an outlet to the collection view because I'm going to let its
tag.
The collection view itself. We're going to use the tag to get to the UI image view. But the collection view, I could have an IB outlet to it, but I don't need one because when I implement the protocol,
it's passed in as a parameter.
Passed in as a parameter, so I'm going to use that for now. Now we do need to do a little setup with some information that we're going to use in the code we're going to write with regard to these trip photos. I don't really believe in sticking numbers in code directly. There should be either constants or variables created, and then you use those throughout the code. So one of those that I'd like to create is called num images. So we're going to say let num images equal to how many we have, which is 40. We would typically, again, probably be pulling these images from some web service, out of a database, and then we could inquire from that how many images we have. Yes, we are statically defining it to be 40 because we know we have 40. That's because our example here is targeted at a collection view, not at the data management piece of a set of photos. We also are going to have only one section within our collection view for displaying these photos. So we're going to say num sections equals 1. And I would like to have an array of image names to work with, even though I could construct the image names because they're pretty consistent, photo 0, photo 1, etc. I would like to work with a data structure that has the image name. So I'm going to construct an array. I'm going to call this image list, and it will be defined as a string array. And so we put string within brackets to create or define a string array, and then we need the parentheses to say construct one of these, just like we do an object of a class. That does not put the names in the image list. That simply defines image list as being a string array object. And then we are going to go into view.didLoad and initialize image list with the names of the photos. So I'm going to do a for loop. And Sean's going to walk me through this because we have a number of different for loops in Swift. We can do a traditional C-style for loop, or we could do
an inclusive for loop. So start typing for, and then whatever your parameter you want to call it. So I would call it index, for example. And then we could do the in keyword, and then you're going to do 0.
because that's our
starting index. And then do 3 dots, and then do your final number. This is inclusive, meaning that you're going to have to subtract number of images by 1, or you could do 39.
But I really define num images so I could use num images. So I'm going to say here num images -1. That looks a little weird. I probably should do this to be clear on what's happening here, right?
Yep. And then there you go.
So this reads that we will have a variable called index that's going to take on values inclusive between 0 and num images -1. Is there a reason in front of index that I don't need to do like a var?
It's just the way the for loop is structured.
Okay. So now I'm going to say image list, which is my array, which has a method called append. And onto that we will append a string, and that string will be comprised of photo followed by the number of the photo, and I put the slash parentheses because that is how I can convert an integer into a string, and that will be followed by jpg.jpg, and so the number is the index. So after this code runs, we will have photo 0 through photo 9 or 39 mean JPEG inside this image list. So I believe we have everything set up to now begin doing the coding to actually implement the protocols for the collection view.
Yep.
We need the view controller to be the delegate and data source for the collection view. So we're going to specify that UI collection view delegate and UI collection view data source are the protocols that this view controller will follow, and then we'll implement the methods for those protocols. The first one is number of sections in collection view. We have defined num sections, so we're going to say return num sections. We also need to specify how many items are in each section. The remainder of the methods that we'll implement are based on the UI collection view, and so they begin with collection view. And collection view, and what did I want? I wanted number of items in section.
And this is going to be the number of images that we have.
So we'll just return the number of images. And then we actually need to build each cell and provide each cell for the collection view. So again, we're going to start typing collection view and find the method that is the one that asks us for the cells.
Which is cell for
item at index path.
Yep.
So we need to construct cells. We have a reusable cell, this guy right here in the interface. And so I'm going to get that cell by dequeuing it. So I'm going to say let cell equal, and we call the dequeue off of the collection view object, which has been passed in as a parameter to this function. So we're just type collection view dot dequeue reusable cell with reuse identifier. And the identifier, we named it cell. That happened here. If I select the cell, I didn't call it cell, did I?
You called it photo cell.
Photo cell. So I'm glad I checked. It's called photo cell. And for the index path, we can take the index path that we were provided and pass it along. We are not differentiating our cells based on the location of the cell within the collection view, so we don't really have to pay much attention to that. That cell, when it's dequeued, will have a type of any object. It is our job to cast it to the type it really is. If we did a custom class, it would be that class, but we just used and I'm going to click on photo cell again and go here and look at it, a UI collection view cell. So I'm going to force cast that as exclamation point, a UI collection view cell. That cell now has an image in it. Well, actually not an image, an image view. So I'm going to get that image view and assign it to a constant called image view. So let image view equal, I'm going to take the collection view, no, not the collection view,
the
cell, and do view with tag, and the tag I supplied was 1 at that time. And again, if I go over to UI image view here, so I have the image view selected, right here is my tag of 1. I now have an image view, and an image view contains within it an image. And let me do autocomplete to let it show its thing.
Well, it's not going to show its thing because cell with view with tag actually returns a type of any object.
Because it doesn't really know what kind of view that is.
Right. So you're going to need to force cast this as a UI image view.
And now, when I try to do my autocomplete, there it is.
Perfect.
So I need to assign an image into the image view, which means I'm going to construct a UI image. And I have an initializer, which is named. And it, according to the autocomplete, requires me to provide the name for the named parameter. And the name is going to come from image list. And image list is an array, so we need to index into the array. And the question is, what index? Well, we are told the index path for the item. Index path has a property called item, which is an integer, which tells us which one it is. So our image is created and assigned to the image view for the cell that we dequeued, and so now we can return that cell. We have, though, not yet told the collection view that this view controller is its delegate and data source. We have specified that this view controller should implement a UI collection view data delegate and data source protocol, and we've implemented the methods we need, but we have not told the collection view that this is the delegate and data source. One way to do that is to control click drag from the collection view to the view controller in Interface Builder and say, you are my data source, again, and say, you are my delegate. This could also be done in code, But to do that, I'd need to have an IB outlet to the collection view, so I could say collection view dot data source equals self, collection view dot delegate equals self. And I actually like this method here. It's clean, doesn't require additional code. We have not done anything yet to detect that the user has selected an image so that when they tap on it, it gets displayed in the UI image at the top.
So
I'm gonna run the app to make sure things are working first. But before I do that, I'd like to think about that UI image view at the top. What would you like to do?
Well, I was going to start talking about the selected image, but let's see it built and run first.
But I'd like to do something with that. Do we want the UI image view when it starts to be blank?
No, so I would assume that you would have your first image already pre-selected for you.
So be up here in view did load, we could take the selected image view and set its image, and just like we constructed a UI image here a moment ago, we could create a UI image based on it being named, and the one that we're interested in is the image list's 0th item. That would be the first image, first photo within that collection of photos. So that way when we run it, we'll see the first image up here. So the only thing we're missing right now is the ability to select an image and have it displayed, but we should see the collection and we should see the first image up in the image view. So there we go. We might do some things to deal with spacing and some stuff on the edges, but it looks right. I can scroll. So let's do that last piece where we detect which item in the collection view has been selected.
So just like the table view, I'm assuming that the collection view actually has a method that is called when you select an item.
So we have did deselect item at index path, did select item at index path. We want to make sure we choose did select. So often, I do this, I've seen students in class do this. You see the word select up in did deselect and you're going fast and it's the first one on the list and you choose it. And if you choose that one, it works, but it seems to be weird in that it lags by one tap. So you tap, nothing happens. You tap again, and then the first tap appears to. And really what's happening is it's setting on deselect, which means the last one you selected becomes the one. And so just make sure you get the one you want here. This is did select item at index path. And this code that we're going to implement isn't much different than what we did to set the first image, except we're going to set it based on the index path. So we're going to say selected image view dot image equals UI image named. Our images are located in image list. And which one do we want?
We want the index path dot item, if I'm correct.
So index path is the index path to the one that was selected, but contained in that is item, which is an integer, which will match up with our array of photos. So now if we run this again, we can tap, or in my case in the simulator, click and select images, and they are displayed. Notice that all of these images fill the cells that they're in. Some of these images, if I could find one here, were shot vertically.
There we
There's
go.
one. There's another one. Notice they entirely fill the cell because we did an aspect fill, but up here we did an aspect fit, so we're seeing the whole image and it fits, even though the UI image view actually is much larger than this at the top. So another thing we could implement is a header and a footer within our section. So let's go back to the storyboard. Let's get rid of the assistant editor. Select the collection view, and notice up here there is a set of accessories, one called section header, another called section footer. This is in fact a header and footer that will appear above and below a collection within the collection view. These things that appeared are reusable views, just like the cell was.
Okay.
So our job is to give them reuse identifiers and to do their layouts and make sure we can get to any items in the layout if we need to implement them. So I selected the header. I'm going to give it a reuse identifier of header. And I'm going to select the footer. And I'm going to give it a reuse identifier of footer. I am selecting the header and deciding that I'm going to put a label inside of it. And I'm going to control-click drag from the label diagonally, and I'm going to center it horizontally and vertically by holding the Shift key down and selecting those two options. I notice I have a problem, though, here. I think I need to think through before I continue my color scheme. We had the images on a black background. I think for my design what I'd like is a collection view that's white with the images on the white, and then the header and footer to be like black and gray.
Okay.
So I'm going to select the collection view, and right here in my inspector or my hierarchy is a good place to select things as we go forward. So I'm going to select collection view, and I am going to choose to have a background color of white.
And notice how the views for the section headers and footers are also changed because they're set on transparent.
They're set on transparent until I do this, which is I'm going to select that first reusable view that has identifier of header, and I'm going to make its background black. And then I'm going to select the label, and I'm going to actually change the color of the label to be white. And I'm going to do this in the footer, and the background is going to be a gray, and I'm going to drag a label into it, centering it as well, horizontally and vertically. I'm holding the Shift key down to make those two selections, and I'm going to also make that label's text white. I guess not have it selected. Let me do that again. I'm going to select the label and now go to its color and select white.
There we go.
Header and footer have reuse identifiers. Label and label here do not have a way to get to them yet, so I'm going to select the label in the header, and I'm going to set its tag to be 1, and the label in the footer and set its tag to be 1. They can both have the same tag because they're going to be obtained off of different objects. So we have the entities within Interface Builder ready. Now I need to go back to my view controller code and think about how I'm going to implement this. When we dealt with the actual cells in the collection view, we had this method collection view cell for item at index path, and we dequeued cells. We're going to do something very similar, but they call these view for supplementary element of kind.
Okay.
And the reason of kind is because there are different kinds.
So there's footer, header.
Footer and header in this case. So I'm going to go below my existing code and start typing collection view. And I'm looking for view for supplementary element of kind. And here we go. And we're going to end up, dequeue a reusable supplementary view of kind and filling it in. The thing is we have two of them here. We have the header and the footer. So I need some logic to potentially do something different with the header and footer, and I need to actually do one thing differently. They need to have different reuse identifiers to retrieve the right one. So I'm going to end up with a supplementary view. So I'm going to say let supplementary view be defined as its type is a UI collection reusable view. And I can define a constant, in this case supplementary view, of a type and not set it. because in Swift, that setting can be delayed to the first time it gets set. And then once it's set, it can't be changed.
Exactly.
Which is fine. So I'm going to now do some logic, and I'm going to say if kind equals a particular kind, and all of our stuff is based off of UI collection. So I can type UI collection, and autocomplete will help us out here. So we have UI collection element kind header and footer. So I'm going to detect that the kind that was asked for is header and do something about that. Otherwise, the kind is going to be the alternative, which is a footer. So now in the header, I need to create my supplementary view by dequeuing it. So I'm going to say supplementary view, that's that constant I defined right here, equals, and we dequeue off of
your collection view. And just like in the collection view where you dequeued a reusable cell, you want to dequeue a reusable view or a supplementary view.
Supplementary view of kind.
Yep.
Okay, so I selected that. The kind, well, I don't actually, I mean, I could actually take this and put it right there, but kind is being passed in. That's what I did my if on, so I can just pass kind along. And then my reuse identifier was header for the header. And my index path really doesn't matter to me, so I can just pass the index path that was provided along. You could have different reusable supplementary views for different paths. We just don't. So that dequeued view will be what kind right now?
It's an any object right now, and I assume we don't want that in the end.
So we need to cast it as what it is, and what did we declare the variable for supplementary view to be? Or no, variable, the constant supplementary view.
UI collection reusable view.
And now that it is that, we have access to the things that it is and can do. In our case, we had defined it to have a label in it that we could obtain using view with tags. So I'm going to say let label equal supplementary view dot, knows what we want to do, view with tag, and the tag we're looking for is 1. And in that label, we are going to put some text.
And label is, again, a type of any object, so you're going to actually have to cast that as a UI label. Notice how you use as exclamation point because you're force casting it.
And notice we have a red exclamation point circle here. As soon as I actually cast that as a label, then that error goes away because it now knows that label does have a text property. What I'm going to put in that label, I'm going to defer for a moment.
Okay.
But we're going to be able to put something in the label in the header. In the footer, I'm going to do this same code, but instead of reuse identifier header, I'm going to say footer.
So in all reality, you could just copy that.
Yes. And you know, one might say you could write this code more efficiently, and I could, but typically my layouts probably aren't this consistent between the header and the footer, and I'd be doing very different things. So This is a good illustration of how you would deal with the header and footer separately. And I need to make sure that the reuse identifier here is footer. Now I need to think about what I want to put in the header and the footer, and I am thinking that in the header I would like some sort of label title for what this collection of photos is, and in the footer I'd like to put the number of photos followed by the word photos. So I'm going to create some variables that are going to hold what I want to put there. And so I'm going to create a thing called header info and a thing called footer info. And in viewDidLoad, I'm going to initialize those with whatever makes sense for this collection. So my header info, which would likely come from whatever data source provided me with the images, or the user provided them, or they were in a database. I am going to statically create a string here, but typically in an app, this would be dynamic information obtained from some source. This collection of photos happens to be trip to Bay Area, California, 2014. And we said the footer is going to be the number of photos, so I'm going to say footer info equals a string that says something photos, and the something is going to be based on a number, so I'm going to say slash parentheses, and in the parentheses I am going to put num images. Or I could have said, maybe even better, image list, and how can I get how many items there are?
.count.
.count.
So when you build and run this, now we should probably see a footer and a header for our single section.
And the build failed because, and we're going to click on the arrow up here, missing return in function expected. Did we ever tell it? No, we were in the middle down here. We weren't even finished writing code here yet.
We were not.
So we said, first off, and that error, by the way, is because we're not returning the supplementary view from this function yet. But label.text inside of my header should be set to header info, and label.text within my footer should be footer info. And now that we have constructed our supplementary view, we should return it just like we return cells inside of the
cell for row and index path.
Yeah. So let's run it now.
And there we go.
So trip to Bay Area, California, set of images, and then it says 40 photos. We don't have a second set of images to work with, but we could make one small change and have it repeat that set of images twice so that we could see two sections. I'm going to say num sections 2. The way the code is written, it's just going to repeat the same 40 photos for both sections. And there's one section, and then there's another section.
And I noticed that the images are touching all the edges. So we have the top images touching the header and the sides, and the footer, the bottom images touching the footer and the sides. Is there any?
I noticed that the footer and the header touch. So let's try and see if we can't, quote unquote, clean this up a little bit.
Okay.
So I'm going to the main storyboard, selecting the collection view, and going to the ruler, and I can do inset. So I'm going to move everything, say, to be 5 points in from all edges. And let's run it and see what that did for us. So not only are the images now in from the edges, they're down from the header a bit. And notice the header and footer are still touching. We don't really have, as far as I could tell, a setting to make that footer not touch the header of the next one. But you had come up with a trick for dealing with this.
So technically, you could probably put a view in the footer and go out down to the object library, search for a view, and then drag it out and only have it be a point wide. So let's search for a view in the object library. Here we go. Let's drag that out. And I'm going to pin this to the leading, trailing, and bottom edges of this view. Editor pin to leading. Editor pin to trailing. Editor pin to bottom. And then I'm going to set a height constraint on this to be 5. 5's all around. Height constraint, we have it set to 25 now. We don't want that, we want 5. And mind you, that's probably not the best way to deal with it, but it gets the job done. So now if we build and run this, there you go.
And that could be a blue line, that could be
Exactly.
That could actually be a view with a graphic in it that has a separator.
And now that the gray footer is different heights than the black header, we could actually go to the footer and change the height by 5 to compensate for the added view that we just added. We can update frames.
There we go.
And then when you build and run these, they will be the exact same size, plus a little white space.
Very good. What happens if we rotate it? Now, one thing that doesn't work particularly well is we're scrolling vertically. Is when we do the header and footer the way that we've done it, you can't just magically change it to scroll horizontally. Let's take a look at what happens there. And the reason is pretty obvious.
Yep.
We designed this bar to be a horizontal bar to have a label in it that's horizontal, and the bars are there and the labels are there, but that just isn't a design that works when it's in the horizontal. Now you could clearly define those bars to be wider or contain an element in them that works in the vertical.
Right.